center near Kourou.
La France, est-ce qu'elle est pour vous une puissance?
Do you think France is a sovereign and independent state whose opinion is respected? What do you think of Germany? You speak with Angela Merkel in both Russian and German, while François Hollande doesn't speak Russian and you don't speak French. Do you have a common language of communication?
The fact that I don't speak French and Mr. Hollande doesn't speak Russian is not a barrier to us. It does not prevent us from speaking a common language, and we understand each other well via an interpreter. Speaking of the level of sovereignty, I will say it again. Any country that becomes a member of a military alliance gives away some of its sovereignty to a supranational body. For Russia, this would be unacceptable. As for other countries, it has nothing to do with us. They have to decide such matters for themselves. In this regard, I think of the Gaullist tradition and General Charles de Gaulle, who protected France's sovereignty. I think this deserves respect. And there's another example, François Mitterrand, who spoke of a European confederation, with Russia as a member. I think this opportunity still exists, and we will have it in the future.
My next question concerns the United States. You will meet with Barack Obama in a few days. You will sit a few meters away from him, but he doesn't seem to be willing to speak to you. What will this meeting be like, and how will relations develop between the world's richest country and its largest country? How can you avoid speaking to each other when there's a real need for this, since war is not that far off?
Well, you're exaggerating about war being not far off. You seem to be feeling aggressive. Whatever gave you this idea, and why are you determined to frighten us all? As for...
Because Ukraine is near Russia.
So what?
And this is where the war is going on. When he mentioned war, he said it is not far off.
There is a punitive operation launched by Kiev's government against the country's own citizens. It's not a war between states. It's something entirely different. As for...
Do you think it should be stopped immediately?
I think Mr. Poroshenko, who has no blood on his hands so far, has a unique chance to halt this punitive operation now and start a dialogue with the people of southeastern Ukraine. As for my relations with Barack Obama, I have no reason whatsoever to believe he is not willing to talk to the President of Russia. But ultimately, it's his choice. I'm always ready for dialogue, and I think that dialogue is the best way to bridge any gaps. We have been in contact until now. We've talked on the telephone regularly.
Russia and the United States are experiencing some problems. Are these problems between two powers or between two people, Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin?
Problems between countries always exist, especially between such big countries as Russia and the United States. There have always been some issues, but I don't think we should go to extremes. At any rate, it wouldn't be our choice. I'm always willing to talk to any of my partners, including President Obama.
So you are willing to talk, and you regret what is happening. But don't you think the United States is trying to surround Russia, to make you weaker as a leader, and perhaps isolate you from the world? You are being very diplomatic now, but you know the facts.
Facts? You've said it yourself. Russia is the biggest country in the world. It would be very difficult to surround it. And the world is changing so fast that it would be basically impossible, even in theory. Of course, we can see attempts by the United States to pressure their allies by employing their obvious leadership in the Western community in order to influence Russia's policy. Russia's policy is based solely on its national interests. Of course, we take the opinions of our partners into account, but we are guided by the interests of the Russian people.
Mr. President, it is very convenient that you are meeting with Mr. Obama on the 6th of June. Perhaps it would be worse if you were meeting with Hillary Clinton. Only a few days ago she said that what Russia is doing in Eastern Europe resembles what Hitler was doing in the 1930s.
It's better not to argue with women. But Mrs. Clinton has never been too graceful in her statements. Still, we always met afterwards and had cordial conversations at various international events. I think that even in this case we could reach an agreement. When people push boundaries too far, it's not because they are strong, but because they are weak. But maybe weakness is not the worst quality for a woman.
au-delà des femmes.
Women must be respected, of course, and I'm sure you respect them. Do you think she went too far? There is a lot of mockery and cartoons in the media, including those showing you. What was your first reaction? Were you angry? Did you want to get back at her or laugh? We have never seen you laugh.
Я как-нибудь доставлю себе.
Someday I will indulge myself, and we will laugh together at some good joke. But when I hear such extreme statements, to me it only means that they don't have any valid arguments. Speaking of US policy, it's clear that the United States is pursuing the most aggressive and toughest policy to defend their own interests. At least this is how the American leaders see it, and they do it persistently. There are basically no Russian troops abroad, while US troops are everywhere. There are US military bases everywhere around the world, and they are always involved in the fates of other countries, even though they are thousands of kilometers away from US borders. So it's ironic that our US partners accuse us of breaching some of these rules.
En matière de budget militaire.
But you've taken some decisions regarding your defense budget. Are you, as president, taking any special decisions on security and defense now? Because the general environment is more risky.
Да. Да, значит, по поводу...
Regarding the defense budget, I'd like to say, for reference sake, because only the analysts know this, that the defense budget of the United States, which we talked about only yesterday, is larger than the combined military budgets of every country in the world. Every country combined. So who's pursuing an aggressive policy? As for our defense budget, it's hardly grown in terms of percentage of GDP, barely by 0.1%. But we want to rearm our army and navy based on modern advanced technology, by reducing quantity and improving quality. We have a relevant rearmament program, and it was not adopted yesterday or in response to the Ukrainian crisis. It's been our policy, which we will continue to implement.
Monsieur le Président, le président syrien Bachar el-Assad.
Mr. President, Syrian leader Bashar Assad has been re-elected president without much effort. Can you influence him? Can you ask him to order his army to stop its atrocities, to stop fighting their own people?
Зверства там творятся со всех сторон. И не в последнюю...
All sides are guilty of atrocities there, but primarily the extremist organizations that are thriving in Syria. We're most worried about
Religieuses, extrémistes.
Religious, Islamic,
Совершенно точно...
those organizations that are directly connected with Al-Qaeda. There are many of them there, which no one tries to deny any longer. It's a general fact. But we're mostly worried that the wrong action could turn Syria into another Afghanistan, a completely uncontrollable spawning ground for the terrorist threat, including for European countries. All the terrorists who are operating there now would eventually move to other countries, including in Europe.
On comprend pas pourquoi vous, Vladimir Poutine.
We don't quite understand why you, Vladimir Putin, the man who wants to modernize Russia, supports a person who is killing his own people, who is covered in their blood. How can this be?
Comment ça se fait?
Объясню.
I'll explain very simply and clearly, and I hope that the majority of the French people who are watching and listening to this interview will understand me. We very much fear that Syria will fall apart like Sudan. We very much fear that Syria will follow in the footsteps of Iraq or Afghanistan. This is why we would like the legal authority to remain in power in Syria, so that Russia can cooperate with Syria and with our partners in Europe and the United States to consider possible methods to change Syrian society, to modernize the regime and make it more viable and humane.
Je voudrais qu'on parle de votre pays, de la Russie. Comment
I'd like to ask you about your country, Russia. How would you describe its current political regime? Some describe it as a democracy, while others argue that Russia is so huge that it needs an iron hand. How does Vladimir Putin define the Putin regime?
à droite et à gauche le régime Poutine.
У нас нет никакого...
The current regime is not connected to any particular person, including the incumbent president. We have common democratic state institutions, although they reflect Russia's needs. What are they? The overwhelming majority of Russian citizens tend to rely on their traditions, their history, and, if I may say so, their traditional values. I see this as the foundation and a factor of stability in the Russian state, but none of this is associated with the president as an individual. Moreover, it should be remembered that we only started introducing standard democratic institutions recently. They're still in the process of evolving.
Est-ce qu'on peut être opposant à Vladimir Poutine sans perdre son
Can a
travail?
person stand in opposition to the authorities in Russia without fear of losing his ties and reputation, without being punished?
Être puni par la justice russe.
У нас большое количество оппозиционных партий.
We have many opposition parties, and we've recently liberalized the procedure for registering political parties. We have dozens of parties that participate in municipal and regional elections.
But is it possible to be a personal opponent of Vladimir Putin without being exposed to risks?
Ну, конечно. Вы знаете,
If you listen to some of our radio stations and watch some TV shows, I assure you, you're unlikely to find anything similar to this kind of opposition in France.
Il y a toujours eu dans la période de la Russie.
There have always been periods of strict order and authoritarian power in Russia, but in the age of the internet, can a country develop by restricting freedoms?
Нет, это невозможно. А мы интернет не ограничиваем. У нас есть определенные...
It's impossible, and we are not restricting the internet. We have certain, whatever we do, someone tries to find something that goes against democratic principles, including the internet. Are there any restrictions in Russia? I don't believe so. Some of our opponents say that there are unacceptable restrictions. What kind of restrictions do we have? For example, we have banned the promotion of suicide, drugs, and pedophilia. These are our restrictions. What's wrong with that?
Вот у нас какие запреты. И что здесь
Et de
такого...
l'homosexualité, qui est une chose très
And homosexuality? It is not pedophilia, it's a different story.
Это не так.
est interdite.
That's not true. We did not ban homosexuality. We banned the promotion of homosexuality among minors. You see, these are two different things. In the United States, since we talked about it, homosexuality is illegal in some states. We impose no criminal liability whatsoever. We banned only promoting homosexuality among minors. It is our right to protect our children, and we will do that.
Est-ce que d'ici la fin de votre mandat,
We would like to talk about the end of your term in 2018. We would like to talk about labor camps. We find such things surprising in the West. For example, Pussy Riot was sentenced to a term in labor camps, and it wasn't just an ordinary prison.
Pussy Riot, par exemple,
Will you close those camps by the end of your term?
à 2 années de camp de travail avant que vous ne les...
Слушайте,
These are not camps. These are places where the inmate's freedom is limited, but they can live a more or less normal life. These are not prisons where people are not allowed to work. Prisons where people can't even work is the worst punishment you can think of. And I don't think we should put all convicts in such facilities where people are deprived of their freedom. I think it is much worse than what you are describing.
Qui vous a convaincu un jour que vous aviez une
Who convinced you that you are carrying out a special mission for Russia?
vous étiez destiné à vous occuper de la Russie
а почему вы
et à
решили...
l'incarner?
Откуда вы взяли, что я считаю, что... мне
Why do you think that I believe that I'm carrying out a special mission?
доверие моих
I have the
избирателей.
trust of my
Я
voters.
проголосовал
Over 63% of Russian citizens voted for me.
избирателей Российской Федерации.
I believe I hold a national mandate to carry out domestic and foreign policy, and I will fulfill my obligations under this mandate.
Буду исполнять свои обязанности.
Et dans la longue histoire de la Russie,
Do you have a role model in Russian history?
un modèle
Are you
russe
guided by
soviétique,
Soviet
un
or Russian
inspirateur, un
politics?
exemple, vous.
Вы знаете,
I have great love and respect for Russian history and culture. But the world is changing, and Russia is too. Russia is part of the modern world, not the world of the past, but the modern world. And I believe it has an even greater future than some other countries that can't take care of their young people, of the new generations, of their children, and believe that they can just let things slide.
Une toute dernière question, Monsieur le Président. Le magazine américain Forbes
And the last question, Mr. President. In 2013, Forbes rated you as the most powerful person in the world. Were you flattered by this title?
honoré par cette distinction.
Знаете, я
You know, I'm an adult, and I know what power means in the modern world. In the modern world, power is mainly defined by such factors as the economy, defense, and cultural influence. I believe that in terms of defense, Russia is, without doubt, one of the leaders, because we are a nuclear power, and our nuclear weapons are perhaps the best in the world. With regard to cultural influence, we are proud of the Russian culture, literature, the arts, and so on. As for the economy, we are aware that we still have a lot of work to do before we reach the top. Although lately we have made major strides forward and are now the 5th largest economy in the world. It's a success, but we can do more.
Vladimir Putin, l'histoire ne
We don't know yet how Vladimir Putin's era will go down in history. What would you like